So it was page 64, where we left off last time. Going into chapter 7. Now, we did have a weekend, so does anyone need a recap of what happened last time? Last time, we read chapters 4, 5, and 6. That was on Wednesday, huh? Wow. And in chapters 4, 5, and 6, Victor Frankenstein, Dr. Victor Frankenstein, actually made the monster. I thought that would come up later in the book. I thought there would be, like, Igor or whatever. No. Either Igor shows up later, or there just isn't an Igor in the actual original text for Frankenstein. He's already done it. He already did the thing. And he didn't explain how he did it, because he's recounting this story to Robert Walton, the ship captain. See, Robert Walton, rescued Victor. He was trapped on an ice floe, moving through the Northern Sea off the coast of Russia. And they became fast friends, and Victor is recounting his life story to Robert Walton in an attempt to, educate other people to not make the same horrible mistakes that he's made. He seems to regret what he's done with this monster at all. And he does not go into the detail of how the monster was made. So there's no, lightning bolts coming down and striking a raised metal platform at the top of a tower. Nothing like that. He doesn't say how he did it, because he doesn't want people to, oh, thank you, Josh. Thanks for inviting me into your haunted house. Appreciate the host, buddy, and welcome. Thank you. Victor doesn't want anyone to know how to make a monster like this again. So he just says basically that he did it, and then moves on from there. And he immediately regretted his decision. He said that he built the creature purposefully to be enormous, 8 feet tall or something like that. Just big guy. And that he used the most beautiful pieces of corpses that he could find. But when the monster sprang to life and opened its eyes for the first time, they were this miserable, horrid yellow that really chilled Victor to his core. And he realized, it upended all the beauty. All of the beauty he had hoped the creature would have was just ruined and whisked away by those horrible yellow eyes, which makes an even worse contrast. Apparently Frankenstein is beautiful, but just has really bad eyes, I guess. Was not expecting any of that. Ah, hello, Stasher Dragon. Awesome. Welcome. First time I've noticed you here. We are reading Frankenstein. I'm just going over what has transpired so far, since it's the beginning of a new week, catching anyone up to speed who might need it. And then we will dive right in. We will be reading chapter 7 today. Chapter 7 and 8 definitely, and possibly 9, because 9's really short. It depends on how much time it all takes. But welcome. You read this years ago. Nice. It's my first time. That's why my stream title mentions blind in it. All the stuff I read on here, I'm reading for the very first time, even though I'm reading it aloud, which does become difficult sometimes. But it is a lot of fun. So I hope that you enjoy my rendition of it. If you do end up liking this, and you want to check out something else, last month we read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And we try to make the stories our own here. So I made Sherlock Holmes speak with a southern Texan accent, and it was a lot of fun. And you're welcome for the welcome. You are, in fact, welcome. Right, so he made the monster and fled the room, I think. When he came back, the monster was gone. And then he went to sleep and woke up to, like, seeing the monster, like, looming over him. And so he just, like, ran out of there. And I think he stayed out of his home for, like, a month or something. When he came back, the monster was just gone. And then his friend, Henry Clairville, showed up to check on him, and because he got into the school that Victor goes to that he really wanted to get into, but he couldn't before. Finally got into the same school. And Henry Clairville is like Victor's best friend, so he went to check on Victor and found him like miserable and just like traumatized, so he's been nursing him back to health. And they've been receiving letters from Victor's family, and now that Victor's finally been restored to health and very, very thankful, Henry gave him a letter from his darling Elizabeth, the girl he grew up with, who was kind of his adopted sister, kind of his cousin, kind of the woman he is in love with too. Like, it's complicated. He has very complicated feelings toward this individual. But the entire chapter 6 was like the letter from Elizabeth, and it made him feel like really happy. Yeah, and I think that's about it. Basically, he was in a better place mentally after the letter from Elizabeth, and went on to just have like a nice summer. Yeah, like summer passed away, the month of May had already commenced, blah, blah, blah. Returned to our college on a Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and everyone we met appeared gay and happy. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. So chapter 6 ended on a high note. Victor is quite pleased. The monster's gone from his life. His best friend's here. He's got an awesome letter from his GF back home. And now things are going to get bad again. And I only know that because I was practicing my voices again, trying to get back into this. So I read, like, this paragraph here. All right. So, let's make this official. Welcome to the Storytime Corner. I am Mars. And today, we will be continuing our reading of Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley Wollstonecraft. Oh, thank you for the follow, Stature. Really appreciate that. Doesn't look like it's gone through on the event list. Strange. But thank you nonetheless. Chapter 7. On my return, I found the following letter from my father.
My dear Victor, you have probably waited impatiently for a letter to fix the date of your return to us. And I was at first tempted to write only a few lines, merely mentioning the day on which I should expect you. But that would be a cruel kindness, and I dare not do it. What would be your surprise, my son, when you expected a happy and glad welcome, to behold, on the contrary, tears and wretchedness? And how, Victor, can I relate our misfortune? Absence cannot have rendered you callous to our joys and griefs. And how shall I inflict pain on my long-absent son? I wish to prepare you for the woeful news, but I know it is impossible. Even now your eye skims over the page. to seek the words which are to convey to you the horrible tidings.
Oof. Probably shouldn't have gone with that voice. That's hard on the voice box. Hard on the throat there.
William is dead! That sweet child, who smiled delighted and warmed my heart, who was so gentle yet so gay. Victor, he is murdered.
Bum, bum, bum.
I will not attempt to console you, but will simply relate the circumstances of the transaction.
Okay, good. This letter isn't that long. It's just like 2 pages.
Last Thursday, May 7th, I, my niece, and your 2 brothers went to walk in Plain Palace.
Footnote: a grassy plain to the south of Geneva, used by promenaders.
The evening was warm and serene, and we prolonged our walk farther than usual. It was already dusk before we thought of returning, and then we discovered that William and Ernest, who had gone on before, were not to be found. We accordingly rested on a seat until they should return. Presently Ernest came and inquired if we had seen his brother. He said that he had been playing with him, that William had run away to hide himself, and that he vainly sought for him, and afterwards waited for him a long time, but he did not return. This account rather alarmed us, and we continued to search for him until night fell, when Elizabeth conjectured that he might have returned to the house. He was not there. We returned again with torches, for I could not rest, when I thought that my sweet boy had lost himself, and was exposed to all the damps and dews of night. Elizabeth also suffered extreme anguish. About 5 in the morning I discovered my lovely boy, whom the night before I had seen blooming and active in health, stretched on the grass, livid and motionless. The print of the murderer's finger was on his neck.
Footnote from Blue Kobold. Promenaders: a person who takes a leisurely walk, ride, or drive in public, or a person attending a promenade concert and choosing to stand in the area without seating. Thank you, Blue Kobold. Clarifying that for anyone who is not in the know. Vocabulary lessons on Mars Storytime Corner. I love it. Okay.
He was conveyed home, and the anguish that was visible in my countenance betrayed the secret to Elizabeth. She was very earnest to see the corpse. At first I attempted to prevent her, but she persisted, and entering the room where it lay, hastily examined the neck of the victim, and clasping her hands exclaimed, "Oh God, I have murdered my darling child!" She fainted and was restored with extreme difficulty. When she again lived, it was only to weep and sigh. She told me that that same evening William had teased her to let him wear a very valuable miniature that she possessed of your mother. This picture is gone, and was doubtless the temptation which urged the murdered to the deed. We have no trace of him at present, although our exertions to discover him are unremitted, but they will not restore my beloved William. Come, dearest Victor, you alone can console Elizabeth. She weeps continually and accuses herself unjustly as the cause of his death. Her words pierce my heart. We are all unhappy, but will not that be an additional motive for you, my son, to return and be our comforter. Your dear mother. Alas, Victor, I now say, thank God she did not live to witness the cruel, miserable death of her youngest darling. Come, Victor, not brooding thoughts of vengeance against the assassin, but with feelings of peace and gentleness that will heal instead of festering the wounds of our minds. Enter the house of mourning, my friend, but with kindness and affection for those who love you, and not with hatred for your enemies. Your affectionate and afflicted father, Alphonse Frankenstein. Geneva, May 12th, 17 something.
Whew, that was rough. Always interesting. Yes. Yes, it is. You know, there's a danger in my habit, my preference for going in blind on reading, of whether it would be a good read or not, whether I might enjoy it or not. I reserve the right to put the book down if I just don't like the darn thing. But I do like it, so there's not a problem. It is interesting. Clerval, and that's Henry Clerval, Victor's best friend growing up. Clerval, who had watched my countenance as I read this letter, was surprised to observe the despair that succeeded to the joy I had first expressed on receiving news from my friends. I threw the letter on the table and covered my face with my hands. Oh gosh, what voice did I give Henry? Oh, right, he was like an excited, younger sounding voice. Oh, wait. He was Dr. Nick from The Simpsons, that's right. My dear Frankenstein! Exclaimed Henry when he perceived me weep with bitterness. Are you always to be unhappy? My dear friend, what has happened? I motioned to him to take up the letter while I walked up and down the room in the extremest agitation. Tears also gushed from the eyes of Clerval as he read the account of my misfortune. I can offer you no consolation, my friend, said he. Your disaster is irreparable. What do you intend to do? To go instantly to Geneva. Come with me, Henry, to order the horses. During our walk, Clerval endeavored to say a few words of consolation. He could only express his heartfelt sympathy. Poor William, said he. Dear lovely child, he now sleeps with his angel mother. Who that had seen him bright and joyous in his young beauty, but must weep over his untimely loss, to die so miserably, to feel the murderer's grasp? How much more a murderer that could destroy such radiant innocence? Poor little fellow! One only consolation have we. His friends mourn and weep, but he is at rest. The pang is over. His sufferings are at an end forever. A sod covers his gentle form, and he knows no pain. He can no longer be a subject for pity. We must reserve that for his miserable survivors. Clerval spoke thus as we hurried through the streets. The words impressed themselves on my mind, and I remembered them afterwards in solitude. But now, as soon as the horses arrived, I hurried into a cabriolet and bade farewell to my friend. Footnote: cabriolet, a light, two-wheeled, single-seated, one-horse carriage. My journey was very melancholy. At first I wished to hurry on, for I longed to console and sympathize with my loved and sorrowing friends. But when I drew near my native town, I slackened my progress. I could hardly sustain the multitude of feelings that crowded into my mind. I passed through scenes familiar to my youth, but which I had not seen for nearly 6 years. How altered everything might be during that time. One sudden and desolating change had taken place, but 1,000 little circumstances might have by degrees worked other alterations, which, although they were done more tranquilly, might not be the less decisive. Fear overcame me. I dared not advance, dreading 1,000 nameless evils that made me tremble, although I was unable to define them. I remained 2 days at Lausanne in this painful state of mind. I contemplated the lake. The waters were placid. All around was calm, and the snowy mountains, the palaces of nature, were not changed. By degrees, the calm and heavenly scene restored me, and I continued my journey towards Geneva. The road ran by the side of the lake, which became narrower as I approached my native town. I discovered more distinctly the black sides of Jura and the bright summit of Mount Blanc. I wept like a child. Dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are clear, the sky and the lake are blue and placid. Is this to prognosticate peace, or to mock at my unhappiness? I fear, my friend, that I shall render myself tedious by dwelling on these preliminary circumstances. But they were days of comparative happiness, and I think of them with pleasure. My country, my beloved country! Who but a native can tell the delight I took in again beholding thy streams, thy mountains, and more than all, thy lovely lake? He loves that lake. Yet, as I drew nearer home, grief and fear again overcame me. Night also closed around, and when I could hardly see the dark mountains, I felt still more gloomily. The picture appeared a vast and dim scene of evil, and I foresaw obscurely that I was destined to become the most wretched of human beings. Alas, I prophesied truly. It's a bit full of himself, huh? And failed only in one single circumstance, but in all the misery I imagined and dreaded, I did not conceive the 100th part of the anguish I was destined to endure. It was completely dark when I arrived in the environs of Geneva. The gates of the town were already shut, and I was obliged to pass the night at Secheron. Footnote, a suburb to the north of Geneva, a village at the distance of half a league from the city. The sky was serene, and as I was unable to rest, I resolved to visit the spot where my poor William had been murdered. So, I'm trying to keep up with things. Like, 95% of everything is great, but like, his family situation sometimes confuses me. I guess William is his little brother and like the youngest in their family. At first I thought, like, is William his own son and he's just never, like, said that explicitly? It doesn't seem like it was ever made explicit, but like, lots of implications, especially earlier in this chapter. I think he's just his little brother. As I could not pass through the town, I was obliged to cross the lake in a boat to arrive at Plain Palace. During the short voyage, I saw the lightnings playing on the summit of Mount Blanc in the most beautiful figures. The storm appeared to approach rapidly, and on landing, I ascended a low hill that I might observe its progress. It advanced, the heavens were clouded, and I soon felt the rain coming slowly in large drops, but its violence quickly increased. I quitted my seat and walked on, although the darkness and storm increased every minute, and the thunder burst with a terrific crash over my head. It was echoed from Salève, the Juras, and the Alps of Savoy. Vivid flashes of lightning dazzled my eyes, illuminating the lake, making it appear like a vast sheet of fire. Then, for an instant, everything seemed of a pitchy darkness, until the eye recovered itself from the preceding flash. The storm, as is often the case in Switzerland, appeared at once in various parts of the heavens. The most violent storm hung exactly north of the town, over that part of the lake which lies between the promontory of Bellerive and the village of Coppet. Another storm enlightened Jura with faint flashes, and another darkened and sometimes disclosed the Mole, a peaked mountain to the east of the lake. So many location names. This is getting really specific. While I watched the tempest, so beautiful yet terrific, I wandered on with a hasty step. This noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hands and exclaimed aloud, "William, dear angel, this is thy funeral. This is thy dirge." As I said these words, I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object, and discovered its shape plainly to me. I knew it. Its gigantic stature, and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon, to whom I had given life. What did he there? Could he be? I shuddered at the conception. The murderer of my brother? Okay, so definitely his brother now. Okay. No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. My teeth chattered, and I was forced to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly, and I lost it in the gloom. Nothing in human shape could have destroyed that fair child. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. The mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact. I thought of pursuing the devil, but it would have been in vain, for another flash discovered him to me hanging among the rocks of the nearly perpendicular ascent of Mount Salève, a hill that bounds Plain Palais on the south. He soon reached the summit and disappeared. Wow. Just immediately scaled a mountain between flashes of lightning. That's crazy. I remained motionless. The thunder ceased, but the rain still continued, and the scene was enveloped in an impenetrable darkness. I resolved in my mind the events which I had until now sought to forget. The whole train of my progress towards the creation, the appearance of the work of my own hands alive at my bedside, its departure. 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night on which he first received life, and was this his first crime? Alas! I had turned loose into the world a depraved wretch, whose delight was in carnage and misery. Had he not murdered my brother? Wow. 2 years already. It's like in the past 3 chapters, we've passed 2 years. I wonder if it was normal to talk about family members like this back then, or if this guy was just weird. TTFN. Oh, like ta-ta for now? Ah, man, I haven't seen that like internet speak in years, I think. Fare thee well, Stasher. Thank you for visiting. Thank you for the follow. I hope to see you again soon. We'll be streaming again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. Same time. See ya. No one can conceive the anguish I suffered during the remainder of the night, which I spent cold and wet in the open air. But I did not feel the inconvenience of the weather. My imagination was busy in scenes of evil and despair. I considered the being whom I had cast among mankind, and endowed with the will and power to effect purposes of horror, such as the deed which he had now done. Merely in the light of my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave, and forced to destroy all that was dear to me. Day dawned, and I directed my steps toward her town. The gates were open, and I hastened to my father's house. My first thought was to discover what I knew of the murderer, and cause instant pursuit to be made. But I paused when I reflected on the story that I had to tell. A being whom I myself had formed and endued with life had met me at midnight among the precipices of an inaccessible mountain. I remembered also the nervous fever with which I had been seized just at the time that I dated my creation, and which would give an air of delirium to a tale otherwise so utterly improbable. I well knew that if any other had communicated such a relation to me, I should have looked upon it as the ravings of insanity. Besides, the strange nature of the animal would elude all pursuit, even if I were so far credited as to persuade my relatives to commence it. And then of what use would be pursuit? Who could arrest a creature capable of scaling the overhanging sides of Mont Saleve? These reflections determined me, and I resolved to remain silent. It was about 5 in the morning when I entered my father's house. I told the servants not to disturb the family, and went into the library to attend their usual hour of rising. 6 years had elapsed, passed as a dream but for one indelible trace, and I stood in the same place where I had last embraced my father before my departure for Ingolstadt. Beloved and venerable parent, he still remained to me. I gazed on the picture of my mother which stood over the mantelpiece. It was an historical subject, painted at my father's desire, and represented Caroline Beaufort in an agony of despair, kneeling by the coffin of her dead father. Her garb was rustic, and her cheek pale, but there was an air of dignity and beauty that hardly permitted the sentiment of pity. Below this picture was a miniature of William, and my tears flowed when I looked upon it. While I was thus engaged, Ernest entered. He had heard me arrive and hastened to welcome me. He expressed a sorrowful delight to see me. And now I have to voice Ernest. Ernest Frankenstein? Another brother? Maybe? Maybe a servant? I'm not sure. I don't remember Ernest. I definitely don't remember voicing Ernest before. What can we do for Ernest? Oh, hi, Lumble. Welcome. Give him a voice that's Ernest. Ha! I'll describe the voice that I gave to Clairville as Ernest. Maybe I can do something different. Maybe I can tweak that. Okay, let's just try something. Welcome, my dearest Victor. That sounds like Dracula. Welcome. I want to suck your blood. Well, it works, I guess. Welcome, my dearest Victor, said he. Ah, I wish you had come 3 months ago, and then you would have found us all joyous and delighted. You come to us now to share a misery which nothing can alleviate, yet your presence will, I hope, revive our father, who seems sinking under his misfortune, and your persuasions will induce poor Elizabeth to cease her vain and tormenting self-accusations. Poor William! He was our darling and our pride. Tears unrestrained fell from my brother's eyes. Okay, yeah, brother Ernest. A sense of mortal agony crept over my frame. Before I had only imagined the wretchedness of my desolated home. The reality came on me as a new and not a less terrible disaster. I tried to calm Ernest. I inquired more minutely concerning my father, and her I named my cousin. She, most of all, said Ernest, requires consolation. She accused herself of having caused the death of my brother, and that made her very wretched. But since the murderer has been discovered... The murderer discovered? Good God, how can that be? Who could attempt to pursue him? It is impossible. One might as well try to overtake the winds, or confine a mountain stream with a straw. I saw him too. He was free last night. I do not know what you mean, replied my brother in accents of wonder. But to us, the discovery we have made completes our misery. No one would believe it at first, and even now Elizabeth will not be convinced, notwithstanding all the evidence. Indeed, who would credit that Justine Moritz, who was so amiable and fond of all the family, could suddenly become capable of so frightful, so appalling a crime? Justine Moritz? Poor girl, is she the accused? But it is wrongfully. Everyone knows that. No one believes it, surely. Ernest? No one did at first, but several circumstances came out that have almost forced conviction upon us, and her own behavior has been so confused as to add to the evidence of facts a weight that, I fear, leaves no hope for doubt. But she will be tried today, and you will then hear all. He related that the morning on which the murder of poor William had been discovered, Justine had been taken ill, and confined to her bed for several days. During this interval, one of the servants, happening to examine the apparel she had worn on the night of the murder, had discovered in her pocket the picture of my mother, which had been judged to be the temptation of the murderer. The servant instantly showed it to one of the others, who, without saying a word to any of the family, went to a magistrate. And upon their deposition, Justine was apprehended. On being charged with the fact, the poor girl confirmed the suspicion in a great measure by her extreme confusion of manner. This was a strange tale, but it did not shake my faith, and I replied earnestly. He replies earnestly to his brother Ernest. Okay. You are all mistaken. I know the murderer. Justine, poor good Justine, is innocent. Back for a bit. Guy we were to have a business meeting with got in a car accident. Oh no. I turned to my husband and said, he's just not that into you. Oof. Oof. I mean, I hope everyone involved in the car accident is okay. I guess I'm glad to have you back, although I wish it were under better circumstances. Welcome back nonetheless, Stasher. We are almost at the end of this chapter, but we will be reading more. He's okay, just gonna be like, oh, okay, great. Okay, cool. I want my stream here to be, you know, happy and comforting and not reports of vehicular fatalities. I'm glad that this person's going to be okay. Okay. Let's finish out this chapter. At that instant my father entered. I saw unhappiness deeply impressed on his countenance, but he endeavored to welcome me cheerfully, and after we had exchanged our mournful greeting, would have introduced some other topic than that of our disaster, had not Ernest exclaimed, "Good God, Papa! Victor says that he knows who is the murderer of poor William." Oh boy, how did I do the dad again?
We do also, unfortunately,
replied my father, whose voice hurts my throat very much to do.
For indeed, I had rather have been forever ignorant than have discovered so much depravity and ingratitude in one I valued so highly.
No, Blue Kobold. No, that's wrong. No. Good news. The good news is that the person in the car crash is okay. My dear father, you are mistaken. Justine is innocent.
If she is, God forbid that she should suffer as guilty. She is to be tried today, and I sincerely hope, that she will be acquitted.
Wow, Dad did a real, 180. He was just saying... I've been forever ignorant. He'd rather have been forever ignorant than to have discovered so much depravity and ingratitude in one he valued so highly. But Dad, Justine's not guilty. Oh good, then I hope she gets off free. I hope she's acquitted. Immediate turnaround. The speech calmed me. I was firmly convinced in my own mind that Justine, and indeed every human being, was guiltless of this murder. I had no fear, therefore, that any circumstantial evidence could be brought forward strong enough to convict her. My tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar. Did any one indeed exist except I, the Creator, who would believe, unless his senses convinced him, in the existence of the living monument of presumption and rash ignorance which I had let loose upon the world? We were soon joined by Elizabeth. Time had altered her since I last beheld her. It had endowed her with loveliness surpassing the beauty of her childish years. There was the same candor, the same vivacity, but it was allied to an expression more full of sensibility and intellect. She welcomed me with the greatest affection.
Your arrival, my dear cousin,
said she,
fills me with hope. You perhaps will find some means
to justify my poor guiltless Justine. Alas, who is safe if she be convicted of crime? I rely on her innocence as certainly as I do upon my own. Our misfortune is doubly hard to us. We have not only lost that lovely darling boy, but this poor girl whom I sincerely love is to be torn away by even a worse fate. If she is condemned, I never shall know joy more. But she will not, I am sure she will not, and then I shall be happy again, even after the sad death of my little William.
She is innocent, my Elizabeth, said I, and that shall be proved. Fear nothing, but let your spirits be cheered by the assurance of her acquittal.
How kind and generous you are. Everyone else believes in her guilt, and that made me wretched, for I knew that it was impossible. And to see everyone else prejudiced in so deadly a manner rendered me hopeless and despairing.
She wept.
Dearest niece,
said my father,
dry your tears. If she is, as you believe, innocent, rely on the justice of our laws, and the activity with which I shall prevent the slightest shadow of partiality.
Whew. It's the end of chapter 7. 6:10. Okay, how much more we got? Okay. That was only like 9 pages. We got like 13 for chapter 8. It's a longer one. I'm gonna take a little like snack and tea break. So how's the week look for you guys? Any cool plans? Anything exciting or interesting? Cup of tea, absolutely. This is very much a tea-friendly stream, Stasher. I've got like several commands having to do with it. And this is my emote too, by the way, my mug. So cheers to you, Stasher. Thanks for joining us. That was pretty good. I don't think I'd get it again because it was expensive, but it was nice for a change of pace. I went to a food and music festival yesterday. Yeah, mugs in chat. I like to see that. I worked really hard on that emote. It's a hand-drawn recreation of my mug. I went to a food and music festival yesterday with some close friends of mine, whom I love very, very much. And one of the things there was a tea vendor. So I purchased a few fancy teas in singles and brought them home with me. And that was this, some mint green tea from Master Tea Factory. It was okay. Business meeting has to do with our small coffee business, Java Dragon. Wow, that is so cool. Wow. We have a coffee maker person in our chat. What's that called? Like, you're not a barista. You're in the industry of coffee. Is there a word for that? If there is, I don't know it. Maybe you can educate us. We like education here. We like to learn. We're always picking up new vocabulary and things as we go through these books. But that is so cool that you have your own coffee business. I like coffee too. I think I prefer the smell of coffee over the taste generally. I've only had like one coffee black that I liked in Seattle. That was amazing. best coffee I've ever had was when I went to Seattle. Usually I put a lot of like creamer and sweetener in my coffee. That's my preference. Dragons are cool. I think dragons are kind of overdone, but I like classic interpretation of dragons. Like the old folklore that they appear in, things like that. And I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, so I'm kind of obliged to like dragons anyway. Kind of comes with the territory. Okay, let's get back to it. Oh yeah, you might get along with Blue Kobold here because he's technically named after a dragon thing. Oh, I highly recommend Door County Coffee. They use the top 2% quality beans, especially class 1 or some sort of title. Even second day Door Company coffee is better than some freshly made coffee. Oh, that's cool. Never heard of them before. I'll make a note of that to look that up later. Door County Coffee. Cool. Thank you. You know, usually I try to stick to decaf if I'm doing coffee. Like this is green tea, and sometimes I do black tea as well. But I'm like hypersensitive to caffeine. So part of my trouble with coffee is finding decaf coffee that tastes like normal coffee. Because I'm sure you know, like there is a difference. It's hard to find tasty decaf coffee. For me, anyway. Chapter 8. We passed a few sad hours until 11 o'clock, when the trial was to commence. My father and the rest of the family being obliged to attend as witnesses, I accompanied them to the court. During the whole of this wretched mockery of justice, I suffered living torture. It was to be decided whether the result of my curiosity and lawless devices would cause the death of two of my fellow beings, one a smiling babe, full of innocence and joy, the other far more dreadfully murdered, with every aggravation of infamy that would make the murder memorable in horror. Justine also was a girl of merit, and possessed qualities which promised to render her life happy. Now, all was to be obliterated in an ignominious grave. Let me try that again. It's hard to do this word with this voice. Ignominious grave. All was to be obliterated in an ignominious grave, and I the cause. Nailed it. 1,000 times rather would I have confessed myself guilty of the crime ascribed to Justine. But I was absent when it was committed, and such a declaration would have been considered as the ravings of a madman, and would not have exculpated her who suffered through me. The appearance of Justine was calm. She was dressed in mourning, and her countenance, always engaging, was rendered by the solemnity of her feelings exquisitely beautiful. Yet she appeared confident in innocence, and did not tremble, although gazed on and execrated by thousands, for all the kindness which her beauty might otherwise have excited was obliterated in the minds of the spectators by the imagination of the enormity she was supposed to have committed. She was tranquil, yet her tranquility was evidently constrained, and as her confusion had before been adduced as a proof of her guilt, she worked up her mind to an appearance of courage. When she entered the court, she threw her eyes round it and quickly discovered where we were seated. A tear seemed to dim her eye when she saw us, but she quickly recovered herself, and a look of sorrowful affection seemed to attest her utter guiltlessness. The trial began, and after the advocate against her had stated the charge, several witnesses were called. Several strange facts combined against her, which might have staggered any one who had not such proof of her innocence as I had. She had been out the whole of the night on which the murder had been committed, and toward morning had been perceived by a market woman not far from the spot where the body of the murdered child had been afterwards found. The woman asked her what she did there, but she looked very strangely, and only returned a confused and unintelligible answer. She returned to the house about 8 o'clock, and when one inquired where she had passed the night, she replied that she had been looking for the child, and demanded earnestly if anything had been heard concerning him. When shown the body, she fell into violent hysterics and kept her bed for several days. The picture was then produced, which the servant had found in her pocket, and when Elizabeth, in a faltering voice, proved that it was the same which an hour before the child had been missed, she had placed round his neck, a murmur of horror and indignation filled the court. The cadence of that last sentence was really strange. Didn't know Frankenstein was a crime drama, unless you count Crimes Against God. Good one. That was pretty good. Pretty good. Justine was called on for her defense. As the trial had proceeded, her countenance had altered. Surprise, horror, and misery were strongly expressed. Sometimes she struggled with her tears, but when she was desired to plead, she collected her powers and spoke in an audible, although variable voice. Variable voice. No pressure, right? Okay, so she's like on the verge of like panic and fear. A quavering voice. Yeah, right. Now I do, thank God, I finally have a chance here to use a voice that does not necessarily sound like a mutation of this voice, because almost every character in this book so far has been a relative of Frankenstein. I can do something else, finally. Oh. Okay.
God knows,
She said.
how entirely I am innocent, but I do not pretend that my protestation should acquit me. I rest my innocence on a plain and simple explanation of the facts which have been adduced against me, and I hope the character I have always borne will incline my judges to a favorable interpretation, where any circumstance appears doubtful or suspicious.
Whew, that was tough. She then related that, by the permission of Elizabeth, she had passed the evening of the night on which the murder had been committed at the house of an aunt at Cheney. Cheney? C-H-E-N-E. Cheney? Sheen? China? I really don't know how to pronounce this. Just gonna go with Cheen. At Cheen, a village situated at about a league from Geneva. On her return, at about 9 o'clock, she met a man who asked her if she had seen anything of the child who was lost. She was alarmed by this account and passed several hours in looking for him. When the gates of Geneva were shut, and she was forced to remain several hours of the night in a barn belonging to a cottage, being unwilling to call up the inhabitants, to whom she was well known. Most of the night she spent here watching. Toward morning, she believed that she slept for a few minutes. Some steps disturbed her, and she awoke. It was dawn, and she quitted her asylum, that she might again endeavor to find my brother. If she had gone near the spot where his body lay, it was without her knowledge. That she had been bewildered when questioned by the market woman was not surprising, since she had passed a sleepless night. And the fate of poor William was yet uncertain. Concerning the picture, she could give no account. Like chêne, it's French for oak. Thank you, Blue Kobold. Had been committed at the house of an aunt at Chêne, a village situated about a league from Geneva. Okay, cool. That does sound better. Thank you. Please correct me if I get something wrong. I do not want to spread misinformation. It's another one of the dangers of reading blind. I'm going to run into words and names that I have never seen before, and I do not know how to say necessarily the right way the first time. Oh God. Oh, more Justine.
I know
Continued the unhappy victim.
how heavily and fatally this one circumstance weighs against me, but I have no power of explaining it, and when I have expressed my utter ignorance, I am only left to conjecture concerning the probabilities by which it might have been placed in my pocket. But here also I am checked. I believe that I have no enemy on earth, and none surely would have been so wicked as to destroy me wantonly. Did the murderer place it there? I know of no opportunity afforded him for so doing. Or if I had, why should he have stolen the jewel to part with it again so soon? I commit my cause to the justice of my judges, yet I see no room for hope. I beg permission to have a few witnesses examined concerning my character, and if their testimony shall not outweigh my supposed guilt, I must be condemned. Although I would pledge my salvation on my innocence.
Several witnesses were called, who had known her for many years, and they spoke well of her. But fear and hatred of the crime of which they supposed her guilt rendered them timorous and unwilling to come forward. Elizabeth saw even this last resource, her excellent dispositions and irreproachable conduct, about to fail the accused, when, although violently agitated, she desired permission to address the court. Oh God, here we go again. I hope there's not a lot of Justine in the future chapters. Whew.
I am
Said she.
the cousin.
Wait, no. This is Elizabeth. Yes, okay, great. I can do Elizabeth, that's fine.
I am
No, I'm still doing Justine. It's like Victor, but higher and more like whispery, more like whimsy.
I am
said she.
the cousin of the unhappy child who was murdered, or rather his sister, for I was educated by and have lived with his parents ever since, and even long before his birth.
Time to invest in a voice changing app. Yeah, I've thought about it. It's also part of the fun, though. I get compliments on my voice work fairly often, I'll have you know. I'm kind of proud of it, I guess, but I know I'm just an amateur. Okay. It would be fun to do a voice program, though.
It may, therefore, be judged indecent in me to come forward on this occasion. But when I see a fellow creature about to perish through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak, that I may say what I know of her character. I am well acquainted with the accused. I have lived in the same house with her, at one time for 5, and at another for nearly 2 years. During all that period, she appeared to me the most amiable and benevolent of human creatures. She nursed Madame Frankenstein, my aunt, in her last illness with the greatest affection and care, and afterwards attended her own mother during a tedious illness in a manner that excited the admiration of all who knew her. After which she again lived in my uncle's house, where she was beloved by all the family. She was warmly attached to the child who is now dead, and acted toward him like a most affectionate mother. For my own part, I do not hesitate to say that, notwithstanding all the evidence produced against her, I believe and rely on her perfect innocence. She had no temptation for such an action. As to the bauble on which the chief proof rests, if she had earnestly desired it, I should have given willingly it to her. I should have willingly given it to her. So much do I esteem and value her.
A murmur of approbation followed Elizabeth's simple and powerful appeal, but it was excited by the generous interference and not in favor of poor Justine, on whom the public indignation was turned with renewed violence, charging her with the blackest ingratitude. She herself wept as Elizabeth spoke, but she did not answer. My own agitation and anguish was extreme during the whole trial. I believed in her innocence. I knew it. Could the demon who had, I did not for a minute doubt, murdered my brother, also in his hellish sport have betrayed the innocent to death and ignominy? I could not sustain the horror of my situation, and when I perceived that the popular voice and the countenances of the judges had already condemned my unhappy victim, I rushed out of the court in agony. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold. I passed a night of unmingled wretchedness. In the morning I went to the court. My lips and throat were parched. Accurate. Very thirsty. I dared not ask the fatal question, but I was known, and the officer guessed the cause of my visit. The ballots had been thrown. They were all black, and Justine was condemned. I cannot pretend to describe what I then felt. I had before experienced sensations of horror, and I have endeavored to bestow upon them adequate expressions, but words cannot convey an idea of the heart-sickening despair that I then endured. The person to whom I addressed myself added that Justine had already confessed her guilt. That evidence, he observed, was hardly required in so glaring a case, but I am glad of it, and indeed none of our judges like to condemn a criminal upon circumstantial evidence, be it ever so decisive. This was strange and unexpected intelligence. What could it mean? Had my eyes deceived me? And was I really as mad as the whole world would believe me to be if I disclosed the object of my suspicions? I hastened to return home, and Elizabeth eagerly demanded the result. What do you guys think? Do you think Justine did it, or do you think it was the creature that Victor made? I'm kind of on the fence. It would be an interesting twist if Justine actually was the murderer, and that Victor's condemnation of the creature is unjustly appointed. Let's continue. My cousin, replied I, it is decided as you may have expected. All the judges had rather that 10 innocent should suffer than that one guilty should escape. But she has confessed. Victor is an unreliable narrator and killed him himself. You know, that may be something to consider. I hadn't thought of before. It's entirely possible that he might be lying through his teeth about this whole story that he's recounting to Robert Walton. Embellishing details, making stuff up, leaving stuff out. Because this isn't some objective narrator, we have to remember. This is Victor's own account of the events of his life leading up to when Robert Walton rescued him from the ice. So you might have an interesting point there. I bet someone's written a really compelling essay on whether Victor's account can be trusted or not. If she did it, maybe someone made her do it. Oh. That could be interesting. I hadn't thought of that either. Under duress. Well, you're cheating because you've actually read this story before. But I don't know. Okay, we'll keep going and find out. This was a dire blow to poor Elizabeth. A couple decades ago. Oh, wow, okay. Who had relied with firmness upon Justine's innocence.
Alas,
said she.
how shall I ever again believe in human goodness? Justine, whom I loved and esteemed as my sister, how could she put on those smiles of innocence only to betray? Her mild eyes seemed incapable of any severity or guile, and yet she has committed a murder.
Soon after, we heard that the poor victim had expressed a desire to see my cousin. My father wished her not to go, but said that he left it to her own judgment and feelings to decide.
Yes,
said Elizabeth.
I will go, although she is guilty, and you, Victor, shall accompany me. I cannot go alone.
The idea of this visit was torture to me. Yet I could not refuse. We entered the gloomy prison chamber and beheld Justine sitting on some straw at the further end. Her hands were manacled, and her head rested on her knees. She rose on seeing us enter, and when we were left alone with her, she threw herself at the feet of Elizabeth, weeping bitterly. My cousin wept also.
Oh, Justine,
said she.
Why did you rob me of my last consolation? I relied on your innocence, and although I was then very wretched, I was not so miserable as I am now. And do you also believe that I am so very, very wicked? Do you also join with my enemies to crush me, to condemn me as a murderer?
Her voice was suffocated with sobs.
Rise, my poor girl,
said Elizabeth.
Why do you kneel if you are innocent? I am not one of your enemies. I believed you guiltless, notwithstanding every evidence, until I heard that you had yourself declared your guilt. That report you say is false, and be assured, dear Justine, that nothing can shake my confidence in you for a moment but your own confession. I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed that I might obtain absolution, but now that falsehood lies heavier at my heart than all my other sins. The God of heaven forgive me. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor has besieged me. He threatened and menaced until I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was. He threatened excommunication and hellfire in my last moments if I continued obdurate. Dear lady, I had none to support me. All looked on me as a wretch doomed to ignominy and perdition. What could I do? In an evil hour I subscribed to a lie, and now only am I truly miserable.
She paused, weeping, and then continued.
I thought with horror, my sweet lady, that you should believe your Justine, whom your blessed aunt had so highly honored, and whom you loved, was a creature capable of a crime which none but the devil himself could have perpetrated. Dear William, dearest blessed child, I soon shall see you again in heaven, where we shall all be happy, and that consoles me, going as I am to suffer ignominy and death.
Mary Shelley really likes this word ignominy. It's everywhere.
Oh, Justine, forgive me for having one moment distrusted you. Why did you confess? But do not mourn, dear girl, do not fear. I will proclaim, I will prove your innocence. I will melt the stony hearts of your enemies by my tears and prayers. You shall not die. You, my playfellow, my companion, my sister, perish on the scaffold. No, no, I never could survive so horrible a misfortune.
Justine shook her head mournfully.
I do not fear to die,
she said.
That pang is past. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. I leave a sad and bitter world, and if you remember me and think of me as one unjustly condemned, I am resigned to the fate awaiting me. Learn from me, dear lady, to submit in patience to the will of heaven.
Very faithful lady here. During this conversation, I had retired to a corner of the prison room, where I could conceal the horrid anguish that possessed me. Despair! Who dare talk of that? The poor victim who on the morrow was to pass the awful boundary between life and death felt not as I did such deep and bitter agony. Wow, Victor! Way to make it all about you. Narcissist. I gnashed my teeth and ground them together, uttering a groan that came from my inmost soul. Justine started. When she saw who it was, she approached me and said,
Dear sir, you are very kind to visit me. You, I hope, do not believe that I am guilty.
I could not answer.
No, Justine,
said Elizabeth.
He is more convinced of your innocence than I was, for even when he heard that you had confessed, he did not credit it.
Crazy to think about how false confessions are still a thing, right? Literally centuries later.
I truly thank him. In these last moments, I feel the sincerest gratitude toward those who think of me with kindness. How sweet is the affection of others to such a wretch as I am. It removes more than half my misfortune, and I feel as if I could die in peace now that my innocence is acknowledged by you, dear lady, and your cousin.
Thus the poor sufferer tried to comfort others and herself. She indeed gained the resignation she desired, but I, the true murderer, felt the never-dying worm alive in my bosom, which allowed of no hope or consolation. Elizabeth also wept, and was unhappy, but hers also was the misery of innocence, which, like a cloud that passes over the fair moon, for a while hides but cannot tarnish its brightness. Anguish and despair had penetrated into the core of my heart. I bore a hell within me, which nothing could extinguish. We stayed several hours with Justine, and it was with great difficulty that Elizabeth could tear herself away.
I wish
Cried she,
that I were to die with you. I cannot live in this world of misery.
Justine assumed an air of cheerfulness, while she with difficulty repressed her bitter tears. She embraced Elizabeth and said in a voice of half-suppressed emotion,
Farewell, my sweet lady, dearest Elizabeth, my beloved and only friend. May heaven in its bounty bless and preserve you. May this be the last misfortune that you will ever suffer. Live and be happy, and make others so.
and on the morrow, Justine died. Wow, just like that, huh? Elizabeth's heart-rending eloquence failed to move the judges from their settled conviction in the criminality of the saintly sufferer. My passionate and indignant appeals were lost upon them, and when I received their cold answers and heard the harsh, unfeeling reasoning of these men, my purposed avowal died away on my lips. Thus I might proclaim myself a madman, but not revoke the sentence passed upon my wretched victim. She perished on the scaffold as a murderess. Victor, Victor, Victor. So he preserved his own reputation. At the cost of Justine's life, whom even he believed innocent. From the tortures of my own heart, I turned to contemplate the deep and voiceless grief of my Elizabeth. This also was my doing, and my father's woe, and the desolation of that late so smiling home, all was the work of my thrice accursed hands. Ye weep, unhappy ones, but these are not your last tears. Again shall you raise the funeral wail, and the sound of your lamentations shall again and again be heard. Frankenstein, your son, your kinsman, your early much-loved friend, he who would spend each vital drop of blood for your sakes, who has no thought nor sense of joy, except as it is mirrored also in your dear countenances, who would fill the air with blessings and spend his life in serving you, he bids you weep, to shed countless tears, happy beyond his hopes, if thus inexorable fate be satisfied, and if the destruction pause before the peace of the grave, have succeeded to your sad torments. Wow, that was impassioned. Thus spoke my prophetic soul. As torn by remorse, horror, and despair, I beheld those I loved spend vain sorrow upon the graves of William and Justine, the first hapless victims to my unhallowed arts. Boom! That's chapter 8, baby. Let me check something real quick. I need to check my schedule. Justine's dead. Like when I said earlier, I hope I don't have to do this voice in the future chapters. I didn't mean that I wanted her to die. Just fade into the background, I guess. But this is a horror story after all, so really, are any of us surprised? And Victor says even more people are going to die before the end of this story. Yeesh. Strap in, I guess. It's going to be a bumpy ride.